14 years old, my parents shoved a crying newborn into my arms and locked my bedroom door. "Your responsibility now," my mother said through the wood. I never went to college. I never left this town. But I made sure she did. Last spring, she passed the bar exam and walked into my parents' living room wearing a custom-tailored suit. The color drained from their faces. Before I tell you how we dismantled their empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. The piece of paper slid across the glass coffee table and stopped inches from my hands. It bore the official seal of the county court. I did not need to read the fine print to know what it was. I process real estate titles for a living. I recognize a formal eviction notice before the ink dries. "You have 30 days to vacate the guest house," my father Richard announced. He stood by the marble fireplace swirling ice in a crystal glass. "We are breaking ground on the new infinity pool next month, and the bulldozers need that space." I sat on the edge of the leather sofa and looked at the paper. For 24 years, that cramped guest house behind the main estate had been my only shelter. It was the place they banished me to when they decided my existence was an inconvenience. My older sister Vanessa shifted in the armchair opposite me. She wore a silk emerald dress that cost more than my car. She crossed her legs and offered a tight, patronizing smile. "It is time for you to grow up, Harper," she said. "You are 38 years old. You cannot live off our parents forever. It is a bad look for the family." I shifted my gaze to the man standing behind Vanessa. Marcus was her husband of 4 years. He was a prominent venture capitalist, a self-made man whose firm managed billions in assets. He wore a charcoal suit and possessed an observant, analytical gaze. Marcus married Vanessa, believing she was the refined, flawless daughter of a respectable family. He had no idea he married a ghost story. I picked up the eviction notice and folded it once. "A bad look," I repeated. The word hung in the chilled air of the living room. "You know what I find a bad look, Vanessa? I find it a bad look that 24 years ago, your parents carried your newborn baby out of your hospital room, walked down the hall, and dumped her onto my bed." The room went still. My mother, Cynthia, dropped her teacup onto its porcelain saucer with a sharp clatter. "Shut your mouth!" Cynthia snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "We do not speak of that." I kept my eyes locked on my sister. I ignored my mother entirely. They locked my bedroom door. "Vanessa," I continued, keeping my tone dead level. "I was a child. I gave up my high school diploma and my youth to raise the infant you threw away so you could attend your Ivy League sorority parties with a clean reputation. I lived in that drafty guest house because you needed me hidden. Now you want to pave over it for a swimming pool." Marcus lowered his drink. His sharp eyes darted from me to his wife, his brow furrowed. "What baby?" Marcus asked. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of a man who demanded facts. "Vanessa, you told me you never had children." Vanessa's face turned the color of chalk. The pristine socialite facade fractured. She shot out of her armchair, her hands shaking. "She is lying, Marcus," Vanessa yelled. "She is a bitter, pathetic woman making up stories because Dad is finally kicking her out." Vanessa lunged toward me. She raised her hand, aiming a stinging strike right at my cheek to shut me up. I did not flinch. I did not raise my arms to block her. Before her palm could connect, the heavy oak double doors of the living room swung open. The polished brass handles hit the drywall with a resounding thud. Everyone turned. A young woman stepped into the foyer. She wore a razor-sharp midnight blue suit and carried a structured leather briefcase. Her posture radiated authority. She was 24 years old, but her eyes carried the hardened wisdom of a seasoned litigator. She walked straight into the center of the room. She bypassed Marcus and ignored Vanessa entirely. She dropped her heavy briefcase right on top of the eviction notice resting on the glass table. "Hello, grandparents," Olivia said, offering a smile that held zero warmth. "You can throw that paper away. The eviction notice is legally void." The heavy oak doors shutting behind Olivia sent a dull echo through the vast living room. The grand entrance froze every person in the space. Richard stopped swirling the ice in his crystal glass. Cynthia sat rigid on the edge of her seat, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the armrests. Vanessa took a slow, involuntary step backward. She moved behind Marcus, using her husband's broad shoulders as a physical shield. Her emerald silk dress rustled in the quiet room. She stared at the young woman in the midnight blue suit like she was looking at an apparition. Richard recovered his voice first. He set his glass on the mantel and pointed a trembling finger toward the doorway. He demanded to know who allowed a stranger into his private residence and ordered Olivia to leave before he triggered the security alarm. Olivia did not flinch. She walked toward the glass coffee table with the steady, measured pace of a seasoned litigator entering a familiar courtroom. She stopped right next to where I was sitting. She rested a hand on my shoulder for a brief second. It was a silent, grounded gesture that communicated years of unspoken gratitude. She turned her attention back to Richard. She introduced herself clearly and without a trace of hesitation. She stated her name was Olivia, and she was the infant they discarded in the guest house 24 years ago. She added that she currently served as a corporate attorney at a downtown litigation firm, and she was acting as my official legal counsel. Richard's face shifted from red to a sickly pale gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but Olivia did not give him the room. She pointed to the eviction notice resting on the glass table. She informed him that his demand to vacate the premises within 30 days lacked any legal standing. She explained the mechanics of the situation with surgical precision. She reminded him that my profession involved title searches and property appraisals. She stated we ran a comprehensive background check on the estate deeds the moment the eviction threat loomed. She revealed that Richard did not own the estate free and clear. He had secretly leveraged the entire property, taking out a massive second mortgage 5 years ago to fund a series of failed commercial investments. Olivia pulled a crisp printed ledger from her leather briefcase and dropped it next to the eviction notice. She announced that Richard was currently 90 days delinquent on his mortgage payments. The bank had already initiated preliminary foreclosure protocols. She explained that a homeowner in active default does not possess the legal authority to demolish existing structures or undertake unapproved landscape construction, like an infinity pool. The eviction was a desperate smokescreen to clear the lot for a rapid distress sale before the bank seized the gates. Richard staggered slightly, hitting the edge of the marble fireplace. His financial ruin was laid bare in front of his wealthy son-in-law. He tried to stammer a denial, claiming the documents were fabricated and the payments were just delayed due to a banking error. Marcus did not look at Richard. The venture capitalist ignored the revelation of his father-in-law impending bankruptcy. Marcus possessed a mind trained to identify the most critical liability in any room. He slowly turned his head and looked down at his wife hiding behind his arm. Vanessa shrank under his gaze. Marcus was a man who demanded honesty above all else. He built his career analyzing risk and exposing fraudulent founders. He asked Vanessa a single direct question. He wanted to know if the young lawyer standing in front of them was her biological daughter. Vanessa's chest heaved. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The flawless socialite persona crumbled. She realized she was seconds away from losing a billion-dollar marriage. She deployed the only tactic she knew. She manufactured a crisis. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled over her carefully applied makeup. She grabbed Marcus' lapel, burying her face in his chest. She sobbed loudly, playing the role of a traumatized victim, confronting a dark past. She admitted she gave birth at 16, but she twisted the narrative with terrifying speed. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She told Marcus that I was an unstable, jealous sibling who manipulated the situation. She claimed I kidnapped the baby from the hospital room. She spun a frantic story alleging I locked myself in the guest house and threatened to harm the infant if anyone tried to separate us. She wept, recounting how her parents decided to keep the situation quiet to protect her from a devastating public scandal and to save the baby from my alleged insanity. Marcus frowned. The fabricated story played on his protective instincts. He looked at me with a hardened, suspicious glare. He asked me if I had stolen his wife-child. He warned me that if I had manipulated a teenage girl and held a child hostage, he would use every resource at his disposal to see me imprisoned. Vanessa gained confidence from his reaction. She stepped out from behind his shadow. She pulled her phone from her designer purse and held it up. She declared she was calling the local police department right now to report a historic kidnapping and ongoing extortion. She threatened to have me dragged out of the house in handcuffs. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not panic. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it face down on the glass table. I smiled. It was a cold, quiet smile. I told Vanessa to dial the numbers. I encouraged her to bring law enforcement into the living room so we could submit all our evidence to a detective. Olivia stepped forward, blocking Vanessa's path to the door. She unclasped the secondary compartment of her leather briefcase. She pulled out a thick, heavy stack of manila folders banded together with thick rubber bands. She dropped the folders onto the glass table right over the eviction notice. The heavy thud echoed off the high ceilings. Olivia addressed Marcus directly, ignoring Vanessa's theatrical sobbing. She told the venture capitalist that a kidnapping implies a lack of consent. She explained that an illegal abductor cannot enroll a child in the public school system. A kidnapper cannot secure state dental insurance. A kidnapper cannot authorize emergency pediatric care without triggering an immediate alert from the state child welfare authorities. Olivia opened the top folder and slid a series of laminated documents across the table toward Marcus. She instructed him to examine the paperwork. Marcus picked up the first sheet. It was a standard pediatric intake form from a local clinic dated 23 years ago. He picked up the next document. It was a kindergarten enrollment application. He flipped to a third page detailing an authorization for an emergency asthma treatment. Olivia pointed to the bottom of each page. She told Marcus to look at the guarantor signature line. "I did not sign those papers," Olivia said, her voice ringing with undeniable authority. "My Aunt Harper did not sign those papers because she was a minor herself when I was placed in her care. The state required a legal adult to authorize my existence." Cynthia let out a sharp gasp. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with sudden terror. The mother who had commanded the room with icy disdain mere minutes ago now looked like a trapped animal. Olivia turned her piercing gaze to my mother. "If my aunt kidnapped me," Olivia asked, leaning over the table, "why does every single medical record, dental chart, and school permission slip for the past 24 years bear your exact signature, Cynthia?" The question hung in the air, suffocating the remaining oxygen in the room. Olivia explained the mechanics of the conspiracy to Marcus. She detailed how Richard and Cynthia orchestrated the entire arrangement to protect Vanessa's reputation. They forced me to raise the child in the shadows. They maintained the legal facade by signing the necessary state documents while refusing to provide a single dollar of financial support. They weaponized the legal system to keep the child hidden while avoiding the actual labor of parenting. Marcus stared at the signatures. He cross-referenced the dates. His analytical mind processed the empirical data resting in his hands. The tears streaming down his wife's face no longer looked like trauma. They looked like the desperate lies of a cornered fraud. Vanessa realized her kidnapping narrative had just been dismantled by undisputed medical records. She dropped her phone onto the sofa. She reached out for Marcus' arm, begging him to listen to her explain the context. Marcus stepped away from her touch. His expression hardened into a mask of pure disgust. The foundation of his marriage shattered right there on the Persian rug. The true nature of the family he married into was exposed not by emotional accusations, but by a stack of pediatric health records hidden for over 2 decades. Richard realized the medical records had demolished his daughter kidnapping narrative and exposed his wife's complicity. The impending foreclosure of his estate had already stripped away his financial dignity in front of his billionaire son-in-law. He panicked. He reacted the way men accustomed to unchecked power always react when cornered. He resorted to physical intimidation. He lunged across the glass coffee table, grabbing the stack of pediatric intake forms and school permission slips. He tore the laminated pages in half, the plastic resisting before ripping with a sharp screeching sound. He threw the shredded documents onto the Persian rug. He turned his reddened face toward the hallway and bellowed for his private estate security. He commanded the guards to immediately escort Olivia and me off the property, threatening to have us charged with trespassing if we resisted. I did not move toward the exit. I remained seated on the leather sofa. Olivia did not flinch or reach for her cell phone to call for backup. She simply watched Richard's childish display of destruction with the calm, analytical gaze of a prosecutor evaluating a hostile witness. She informed him that tearing up physical copies of medical files did not delete the digital records secured in the state health department archives. She advised him to save his energy because the medical records were merely the prelude to the actual litigation. Olivia reached back into her structured leather briefcase. She pulled out a sleek black tablet. She tapped the screen, waking up a detailed spreadsheet filled with highlighted financial data. She did not hand the device to Richard. She turned it toward Marcus, ensuring the venture capitalist had a clear view of the screen. She explained that while investigating the estate deed to block the eviction notice, she stumbled upon a glaring anomaly in the family financial history. She noted that Richard claimed the estate was leveraged to fund commercial investments. However, the initial massive withdrawal of equity occurred 14 years ago, exactly matching the timeline when Vanessa enrolled in an elite Ivy League university. Cynthia let out a sharp, nervous breath. She grasped the edges of her cardigan, her eyes darting between Richard and her oldest daughter. Vanessa stopped crying. The theatrical tears vanished instantly, replaced by a stark, terrified silence. Olivia continued her presentation, methodically dismantling the polished history of the Myers family. She stated that Richard and Cynthia did not possess the liquid capital to fund an Ivy League tuition without jeopardizing their luxurious lifestyle. They needed a massive influx of cash. They could not secure standard educational loans under Vanessa's name because she had already defaulted on a series of luxury credit cards during her senior year of high school, destroying her early credit score. Olivia tapped a specific row on the spreadsheet. The data highlighted a series of massive federal and private student loan disbursements, totaling $250,000. She looked directly at me. I sat on the sofa, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spent my entire 20s working triple shifts as a title searcher, struggling to secure even a basic apartment lease because my credit checks continually returned catastrophic alerts regarding defaulted loans I knew nothing about. I assumed it was a bureaucratic error or a mix-up with a similarly named individual. I spent years fighting automated collection agencies while raising a child in a drafty guest house. Olivia delivered the fatal blow. She revealed that Richard and Cynthia had committed systemic identity theft. The day I turned 18, they utilized my social security number and forged my signature to secure $250,000 in student loans. They routed the funds through a dummy account to pay for Vanessa tuition, room and board, and living expenses across the country. They deliberately ruined my financial future, ensuring I could never afford college or buy a home to pave a golden road for their favorite child. The silence in the living room was suffocating. I stared at the people who raised me. The betrayal bypassed anger and settled into a cold, hollow realization. They did not just lock me in a room with a baby. They shackled me with a mountain of fraudulent debt, ensuring I could never escape the guest house. They designed my poverty. Marcus stepped away from his wife as if she had suddenly caught fire. He was a man who built his empire evaluating the integrity of corporate founders. He scrutinized balance sheets for a living. He looked at Vanessa, observing the panic radiating from her posture. He asked her a single chilling question. He wanted to know if her entire Ivy League education, the very credential that secured her entry into his elite social circle, was funded by stealing her younger sister's identity. Vanessa scrambled backward, shaking her head frantically. She tried to deny knowledge of the scheme, claiming her parents handled all the finances, and she just assumed she received a merit scholarship. She reached out for Marcus, pleading with him to believe she was innocent of the financial crimes. Richard stepped in front of his daughter, trying to salvage the wreckage. His face was a mask of furious desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at Olivia. He accused the young lawyer of illegally hacking into sealed financial records. He threatened to file an immediate complaint with the State Bar Association, promising to have her stripped of her legal license for unauthorized data breaches and corporate espionage. He yelled that she would spend the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary for hacking his accounts. Olivia closed the tablet and slipped it back into her briefcase. She offered Richard a cold, unyielding smile. She informed him she did not hack any accounts. She explained that as my legally appointed attorney, holding a signed power of attorney document, she possessed full authorization to pull my credit reports and investigate any fraudulent accounts opened under my Social Security number. She gathered the evidence through entirely legal standard discovery protocols. She checked her watch, noting the time with precision. She told Richard he should be less concerned about her legal license and far more concerned about the vehicles currently pulling up his long, sweeping driveway. Heavy, determined knocks echoed from the grand front entrance. The sound was loud enough to drown out Richard yelling. The private security guards did not respond. The front doors swung open, not by invitation, but by force. 4 individuals wearing dark windbreakers, bearing the insignia of the State Financial Crimes Division, stepped into the foyer. They were flanked by the local sheriff. The officers did not look at Vanessa or Marcus. They marched directly toward the center of the living room. The lead investigator unrolled a thick stack of legal documents. He announced his presence with booming authority. He stated he held a court-ordered asset freeze and a preliminary warrant for the seizure of the Myers estate records, pending a federal investigation into severe identity theft and bank fraud. The officers fanned out across the room, preparing to secure laptops, filing cabinets, and financial ledgers. Richard staggered backward, collapsing into his leather armchair. The empire he built on lies and stolen identities was being dismantled in front of his eyes. Cynthia buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically, as an officer instructed her to step away from a nearby desk. The eviction notice sitting on the glass table was forgotten, completely overshadowed by the reality that the Myers family was about to lose everything they owned. The raid on the Myers estate triggered a chain reaction that ripped through the affluent neighborhood. The sight of federal agents carrying boxes of financial records out of the grand front doors signaled the end of Richard and Cynthia's social reign. However, the exposure of the identity theft did not break Vanessa. It ignited her survival instincts. She was a woman who married into a billionaire venture capital empire by maintaining a flawless facade. She knew that if the fraud investigation connected her Ivy League degree to the stolen funds, Marcus would annul their marriage instantly. She needed to sever the connection between the crime and her pristine reputation. She needed to destroy the credibility of the two people threatening her lifestyle. Less than 48 hours after the raid, Vanessa retained the services of Thomas Sterling. Sterling was a high-priced defense attorney known throughout the state as a ruthless legal shark. He did not negotiate settlements. He annihilated opposing counsel. He specialized in protecting elite families by burying accusers in frivolous motions and character assassination. Vanessa drained a secret offshore account she kept hidden from Marcus to secure his retainer. The battleground shifted from the shattered living room to the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room of the county courthouse. I sat at a heavy wooden table, my hands folded tight. Olivia sat beside me, organizing her files with practiced calm. The heavy door opened and Sterling walked in. He wore a sharp pinstripe suit and carried a briefcase that likely cost more than my annual salary. Vanessa followed close behind him, wearing a conservative gray dress designed to project modest victimhood. She did not look at me. She took a seat across the table, keeping her gaze fixed on the blank notepad in front of her. Sterling did not wait for the court-appointed mediator to begin the session. He tossed a thick legal petition onto the center of the table. He announced his intention to file an immediate motion to disqualify Olivia from acting as my legal counsel. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the wood. He delivered his argument with a smooth, condescending drawl. He stated that the entire premise of our legal action against the Myers family relied on the assertion that I was the primary caregiver and guardian of Olivia. He argued that since Richard and Cynthia signed all official medical and educational documents, I was legally recognized as nothing more than an unauthorized temporary babysitter. He concluded that without established legal guardianship, my entire lawsuit regarding identity theft and emotional abuse lacked a foundational standing. He claimed I was simply a disgruntled, estranged sister attempting a financial shakedown. Olivia did not flinch. She picked up the petition, scanning the legal jargon. She reminded Sterling that the state recognized de facto guardianship in cases where the biological parents abandoned their responsibilities, regardless of who signed the kindergarten permission slips. She pointed out that 24 years of continuous physical custody superseded a forged signature on a medical intake form. Sterling offered a cold, predatory smile. He reached into his briefcase and extracted a second manila folder. He slid it across the table, stopping it deliberately in front of my hands. He informed the room that establishing de facto guardianship required proving a stable and competent environment. He stated he had acquired compelling evidence suggesting the guest house where I raised Olivia was a deeply unstable and hazardous location. I looked down at the folder. The label bore a psychiatric diagnostic code. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled open the cover. Inside sat a detailed psychological evaluation bearing my name, dated over 2 decades ago. The report documented severe emotional instability, manic episodes, and a recommendation for institutional commitment. The room seemed to tilt. I had never spoken to a psychiatrist in my life. I spent my youth working double shifts to afford asthma medication and winter coats for a child that was not mine. I never had the time or the money to schedule a therapy appointment. The document was a complete fabrication manufactured by Richard and Cynthia to maintain leverage over me in case I ever tried to escape the estate. They weaponized a fake medical diagnosis just as they had weaponized my Social Security number. Sterling watched the color drain from my face. He capitalized on my shock. He announced his plan to submit the fabricated psychological evaluation to the State Bar Association. He argued that Olivia was raised by an emotionally volatile and legally incompetent individual. He claimed her entire legal education and moral character were compromised by her environment. He threatened to file an ethical complaint alleging she was manipulating a mentally unstable relative to orchestrate a fraudulent lawsuit against a prominent family. He aimed to strip Olivia of her law license before her career even started. Vanessa lifted her head, finally looking at me. A faint, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She believed her expensive shark had successfully boxed us in. She thought the threat of destroying Olivia's hard-earned career would force me to drop the identity theft charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. She expected me to sacrifice my justice to protect the child I raised. I felt a sudden crushing weight. The 14-year-old girl who was locked in a room with a crying baby resurfaced. The fear of losing everything to the overwhelming power of the Myers family threatened to consume me. I looked at Olivia, preparing to tell her to back down to save her license. Olivia placed a steadying hand on my arm. She did not look panicked. She looked at the forged psychological evaluation and let out a quiet, dry laugh. She turned her sharp gaze to Sterling. She told the ruthless attorney he made a critical strategic error. He assumed our legal strategy relied on validating my status as a competent legal guardian. She stated we had no intention of defending the guest house arrangement. Olivia reached into her own structured briefcase. She pulled out a thick-bound legal complaint bearing the seal of a federal civil rights lawsuit. She dropped it directly on top of the fabricated medical report. She leaned across the table, mirroring Sterling's aggressive posture. She informed him she was not filing a simple civil suit against Richard and Cynthia for identity theft. She explained she was filing a massive systemic lawsuit against the local county government, the municipal child welfare agency, and the specific family court judge who processed the original medical authorizations 24 years ago. Sterling's arrogant smirk vanished. His brow furrowed in confusion. Olivia detailed the charges with lethal precision. She stated she was suing the municipality for gross negligence and systemic complicity in child endangerment. She argued that local authorities knowingly allowed a wealthy, influential family to hide a minor child in an unapproved structure lacking proper heating or ventilation. She claimed the school district and the medical clinics accepted forged signatures without verifying custody arrangements because they were intimidated by Richard's status. She stated the entire local government turned a blind eye to a clear case of child abandonment and enforced isolation to protect a prominent political donor. The brilliance of the counterattack hung in the sterile air of the mediation room. If Olivia pushed the lawsuit forward, she would drag half the town leadership into a highly publicized federal trial. The mayor, the school board, and the local judiciary would face grueling depositions regarding their failure to intervene in a 24-year-old case of child neglect. Sterling realized the trap he had walked into. I understood that defending Vanessa meant going to war against the entire local political establishment. A high-priced defense attorney survives by navigating the political ecosystem, not by detonating a bomb inside it. If he attached his name to a case that exposed the corruption of the county judges, he would never win another favorable ruling in this jurisdiction again. He stared at the federal complaint, his hands motionless on the table. The sweat beaded on his forehead. The ruthless shark realized he was swimming in waters far too dangerous for his survival. He recognized that Olivia was not a naive young lawyer he could intimidate with a forged document. She was a tactical genius willing to burn down the entire town to expose the truth. Vanessa's smile collapsed. She looked at her expensive attorney, waiting for him to unleash a devastating counter-argument. She expected him to tear Olivia's logic apart. Sterling slowly closed his briefcase. He did not look at Vanessa. He stood up from his chair and addressed the mediator, stating he needed an immediate recess to consult with his client regarding a significant conflict of interest. He knew he had to drop the case before the federal filing hit the public docket. The high-priced legal shield Vanessa purchased had just shattered, leaving her entirely exposed to the impending storm. The sudden departure of Vanessa, high-priced attorney, sent shockwaves through the Myers family. They realized Olivia's federal lawsuit targeting the local government would inevitably drag their private corruption into the harsh light of a public courtroom. The scandal threatened to expose decades of financial fraud and identity theft, destroying their elite social standing. But the true danger lay beyond the walls of the courthouse. The impending media circus jeopardized the crown jewel of their survival. It threatened the billion-dollar venture capital firm managed by Marcus. 3 days after the disastrous mediation session, my cell phone vibrated with an unexpected text message. The sender was a private executive assistant operating on behalf of Marcus. The message bypassed polite introductions. It simply provided an address for an exclusive subterranean dining club located in the financial district and a strict instruction to arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. I was told to come alone. The dining club was a dimly lit fortress of leather booths and heavy oak tables designed for discreet corporate negotiations. I walked past the host stand carrying only a simple canvas tote bag. I navigated the quiet dining room until I located Marcus sitting in a secluded corner booth. He did not stand to greet me. He did not offer the polite, superficial charm he displayed during family holiday dinners. The polished venture capitalist was gone. He sat with rigid posture, projecting the cold, calculating aura of a man accustomed to eliminating liabilities. I slid into the booth opposite him. I did not order a drink. I folded my hands on the dark wood table and waited for him to initiate the conversation. Marcus wasted no time. He informed me that his firm was currently finalizing the initial public offering for a highly anticipated tech startup. The IPO was projected to generate hundreds of millions in new revenue. He stated that the financial regulatory commissions require absolute pristine backgrounds for all managing partners and their immediate family members. Any public litigation involving identity theft, child endangerment, or government complicity surrounding his wife would trigger catastrophic audits and destroy the public offering. He leaned across the table, resting his forearms on the wood. He told me he did not care about the bitter history of the Myers family. He did not care that Richard and Cynthia locked me in a guest house or forced me to raise an abandoned child. He viewed the entire situation as an inconvenient, messy family dispute that threatened to disrupt his balance sheet. Marcus reached into the interior pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He withdrew a crisp, heavy slip of paper and slid it across the table until it touched my hands. It was a certified cashier check. The amount printed in bold black ink was $2 million. He placed a second document on top of the check. It was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The legal contract required Olivia and me to permanently withdraw all pending lawsuits against the Myers family. It demanded our immediate silence regarding the identity theft, the forged medical records, and the true nature of Olivia parentage. It required us to sever all ties and vanish. Marcus presented his ultimatum. He instructed me to take the money, sign the document, and disappear. He stated the $2 million was sufficient compensation to cover the youth I lost and the education I never received. He warned me that if I refused the payout, he would unleash his own corporate legal team. He promised to bury Olivia's federal lawsuit in endless jurisdictional motions and ensure my current real estate appraisal career was dismantled. I stared at the check. The number defied my comprehension. I spent my 20s clipping coupons and rationing heating oil to ensure Olivia could afford winter boots. I navigated relentless anxiety every time a utility bill arrived. $2 million represented absolute freedom. It meant a paid-off mortgage, a secure retirement, and the ability to breathe without the crushing weight of financial panic. It was the exact numerical value of the 24 years stolen from me. The silence in the booth felt heavy. Marcus watched me analyzing my hesitation. He assumed poverty made me desperate. He believed everyone had a price, and he was confident he had just met mine. I picked up the pen resting next to the non-disclosure agreement. I held it for a moment, feeling the cool metal against my fingertips. I thought about the drafty guest house. I thought about the nights I spent rocking a feverish infant while Vanessa attended exclusive sorority galas funded by my stolen Social Security number. I set the pen down. I did not sign the document. I picked up the $2 million check and slid it back across the table toward him. I told Marcus that my silence was not for sale. I explained that accepting his money validated the core philosophy of the Myers family. It confirmed their belief that wealthy individuals can purchase immunity from their own cruelty. I stated I would not teach Olivia that justice carries a price tag. Marcus' jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, assessing my refusal not as a moral victory, but as a tactical miscalculation. He prepared to issue a harsher threat, warning me about the destructive capabilities of his corporate lawyers. I interrupted his impending threat. I reached into my canvas tote bag and withdrew a plain manila folder. I placed it on the table between us, right next to his rejected check. I reminded Marcus that my profession as a title searcher required meticulous attention to detail. I spent my days auditing property records, tracing hidden liens, and uncovering obscured financial pathways. I explained that while Olivia focused on preparing the federal civil rights lawsuit, I focused on investigating the immediate threat. I audited the financial infrastructure supporting Richard and Cynthia, hoping to find leverage to protect the guest house. I opened the manila folder. I slid a series of internal banking statements and corporate transfer logs across the table. I instructed Marcus to review the documents. I told him to look closely at the routing numbers associated with the recent mortgage payments, keeping Richard's estate afloat. Marcus frowned. He picked up the first sheet. His eyes scanned the highlighted columns of data. The annoyance on his face slowly morphed into sharp, focused confusion. I narrated the financial trail. I explained that Richard and Cynthia possessed 0 liquid assets. Their credit was destroyed and their investments were worthless. Yet they miraculously managed to delay the bank foreclosure for the past 3 months by submitting massive cash payments. I pointed to the origin of those cash payments. The funds did not materialize from a hidden savings account or a generous loan from a friend. The money was routed from a specialized discretionary account managed by Marcus' own venture capital firm. Marcus froze. He recognized the account number immediately. It was a restricted internal fund designated for emergency corporate expenditures. He stared at the transfer logs tracing the unauthorized diversion of capital. I delivered the final, devastating truth. I told Marcus that Vanessa did not just steal my identity to fund her Ivy League education. She was currently stealing from her own husband. I explained that Vanessa secretly accessed his corporate discretionary account and embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars to quietly pay off her parents' mounting debts. She was using his venture capital firm as a personal slush fund to protect the Myers estate from public foreclosure and maintain her pristine social facade. The revelation struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. The arrogant venture capitalist realized he was not the powerful mediator solving a messy family dispute. He was the primary victim of a massive financial fraud orchestrated by the woman sharing his bed. His own wife was jeopardizing the impending IPO by quietly siphoning capital from the very firm he built. His eyes lifted from the documents and locked onto mine. The cold corporate detachment vanished entirely, replaced by a terrifying silent fury. The realization that he had been sleeping next to a thief, a woman who compromised his business empire to protect her toxic parents, shattered his reality. I stood up from the booth. I gathered my tote bag, leaving the forensic banking ledgers resting on the table. I looked down at the man who tried to buy my silence. I told Marcus he should worry less about stopping our federal lawsuit and worry more about surviving the SEC audit when they discovered his wife was embezzling corporate funds. I turned and walked out of the dimly lit dining club, leaving the powerful billionaire sitting alone in the booth, staring at the evidence of his own destruction. The morning after my meeting with Marcus, the atmosphere shifted from tense calculation to chaotic destruction. The revelation of the embezzled corporate funds triggered an immediate internal audit at Marcus' venture capital firm. Vanessa realized her husband had frozen her access to all joint accounts and locked her out of the firm accounting portals. She understood the financial walls were closing in, and her pristine elite existence was collapsing. She did not reflect on her actions or attempt to secure legal counsel. She panicked. Her narcissistic mind required a scapegoat, and I was the nearest target. It was a Tuesday just before noon. The mid-sized real estate appraisal firm where I worked operated in a busy open floor plan office downtown. 30 employees were engaged in quiet phone calls and reviewing property deeds. The hum of productivity shattered when the heavy glass entrance doors banged open. Vanessa stormed into the office. She did not wear her usual composed elegance. Her designer coat hung open, her hair was disheveled, and her eyes burned with frantic rage. She bypassed the receptionist's desk, marching directly toward the cubicle rows searching for my workspace. She spotted me near the back wall. She closed the distance in rapid, aggressive strides. I barely had time to stand up before she reached my desk. She did not lower her voice or attempt to maintain decorum. She unleashed a volatile, screaming tirade, ensuring every single employee in the office stopped working to watch the spectacle. She slammed her hands onto my desk, knocking over my coffee mug and scattering pending appraisal files across the floor. She shrieked that I was a manipulative extortionist. She yelled to the silent room that I was attempting to blackmail her family with fabricated financial documents. She spun a hysterical narrative painting herself as the victim of a jealous, disturbed sister who was trying to ruin her marriage out of spite. I did not yell back. I did not engage in the shouting match. I stepped back from the desk, allowing the spilled coffee to drip onto the carpet. I stood perfectly still, watching a woman who had spent 2 decades hiding behind a mask of elite perfection unravel in a cheap public meltdown. The commotion drew the attention of my supervisor. Mr. Davis, the managing director of the firm, stepped out of his glass corner office. He was a veteran of the real estate industry, a man who tolerated zero disruption on his production floor. He walked briskly toward the escalating situation. Vanessa saw the director approach and recognized an opportunity. She pivoted her attack, hoping to weaponize my employer against me. She turned to Mr. Davis, adjusting her posture, attempting to regain a sliver of her former aristocratic authority. She demanded that he fire me immediately. She loudly declared that employing a known extortionist and a convicted fraud compromised the integrity of his entire firm. She insisted that retaining me would result in severe legal consequences for his business. She stood tall, breathing heavily, waiting for the manager to comply with her demands and humiliate me in front of my colleagues. She expected the threat of a scandal to result in my instant termination. Mr. Davis did not look at me. He did not ask for my side of the story. He kept his gaze locked on Vanessa. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a folded legal document. He informed Vanessa that she was correct about the severe legal consequences surrounding my employment, but her understanding of the situation was entirely inverted. He explained that terminating me was legally impossible. Mr. Davis unfolded the document and extended his arm, pressing the heavy paper directly against Vanessa's chest. He told her she had just been served. Vanessa grabbed the paper instinctively. The triumphant sneer vanished from her face. She looked down at the bold federal seal printed at the top of the page. Mr. Davis explained the contents of the document to the silent, captivated office. He stated that earlier that morning, a federal judge had officially designated our appraisal firm as the independent court-appointed auditor in a pending civil litigation case. He explained that my niece Olivia had filed a massive civil lawsuit against Richard, Cynthia, and Vanessa, invoking the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The room fell silent as the implication of the RICO statute registered. It was a law designed to dismantle organized crime syndicates. Olivia had strategically categorized the Myers family, decades-long practice of identity theft, bank fraud, and corporate embezzlement as an ongoing criminal enterprise. Mr. Davis continued his clinical delivery. He stated that the federal court specifically ordered our firm to conduct a mandatory exhaustive appraisal of all physical assets and real estate holdings tied to the Myers family. The judge mandated that I, as the senior title searcher, lead the forensic investigation. I was now operating under the direct protection of a federal mandate. Firing me or interfering with my work constituted a federal offense. Vanessa stared at the subpoena, her hands trembling. The reality of her situation crushed her manufactured narrative. She had barged into my workplace intending to destroy my livelihood. Instead, she discovered that my workplace was now the very mechanism designated by the federal government to dismantle her entire family estate. The firm she tried to weaponize against me was now holding the keys to her financial execution. She looked around the open office. 30 employees stared back at her, not with sympathy, but with clear, cold judgment. They witnessed the elite socialite exposed as a target of a federal racketeering investigation. Her humiliation was absolute and public. Vanessa realized she had no power left in the room. She could not bully a federal judge or intimidate a firm backed by a court order. She turned toward the exit, her shoulders hunched, the expensive designer coat offering no protection from the harsh reality. She stopped just before reaching the glass doors. She turned back to face me one final time. The frantic panic in her eyes hardened into something malicious and desperate. She knew she could not win the financial war, so she sought to inflict the deepest psychological wound possible. She locked eyes with me and raised her voice, ensuring I heard her parting shot clearly. She warned me that if Olivia continued the RICO lawsuit, they would release the audio recording. She claimed they possessed a digital tape from the guest house recorded 24 years ago. She stated the audio contained undeniable proof of my true nature and promised that once the State Bar Association heard what I sounded like behind closed doors, they would strip Olivia of her law license for associating with me. She pushed the glass doors open and disappeared down the hallway, leaving the venomous threat hanging in the air. The financial victory of the subpoena suddenly felt hollow. The ghosts of the guest house, the terrified 14-year-old girl trapped with a crying infant, had just been resurrected and weaponized. The threat. Vanessa, delivered in the center of my office, was not an empty bluff. She understood that financial ruin was imminent under the RICO investigation. Richard and Cynthia recognized that their only remaining leverage was psychological warfare. They needed to destroy our credibility before the federal auditors finished dismantling their estate. They aimed for the most vulnerable target they could find. They aimed for Olivia Future. Less than 48 hours after the office confrontation, a courier arrived at Olivia downtown litigation firm. He delivered a sealed flash drive directly to her reception desk. The package contained no return address, only a digital audio file and a brief typed note dictating their terms. Olivia brought the flash drive to my apartment that evening. The autumn air outside was crisp, but the atmosphere inside the small living room felt suffocating. We sat at the kitchen table, the laptop open between us. Olivia read the extortion note aloud. The demand was simple and devastating. We had 48 hours to formally withdraw the federal RICO lawsuit and drop the identity theft charges. If we refused, Richard and Cynthia promised to submit the enclosed audio file to the State Bar Association Ethics Committee. They claimed the recording proved Olivia was raised by an abusive, unstable guardian. The State Bar requires rigorous moral character assessments for all licensed attorneys. A documented history of severe childhood domestic abuse covered up by the applicant could trigger an immediate license suspension pending a grueling ethical review. They were threatening to kill her career before it truly began. I stared at the silver flash drive. I told Olivia to play the file. She clicked the icon. The audio crackled to life, filling the quiet kitchen with a sound I had spent 2 decades trying to forget. The recording was chaotic and terrifying. The shrill, piercing wail of a newborn infant dominated the background. Over the crying, the frantic, exhausted voice of a 14-year-old girl screamed in the darkness. It was my voice. I was sobbing, yelling jagged, incoherent sentences, begging for someone to take the baby away, claiming I could not do it anymore. The recording painted a horrifying picture. It sounded exactly like an unhinged teenager experiencing a violent psychotic break while neglecting a screaming child. The audio cut off abruptly after 90 seconds. The silence that followed was heavy. The ghosts of the guest house rushed back into the room. I closed my eyes, feeling the phantom weight of a feverish infant against my chest and the desperate isolation of those endless nights. Richard and Cynthia had placed a baby monitor in the guest house, not to ensure our safety, but to harvest ammunition. They recorded my lowest, most terrified moments, preserving my childhood trauma in a digital vault, just in case they ever needed to control me. I looked at Olivia. She sat perfectly still, staring at the blank screen. She had dedicated years of her life working grueling internships and studying late into the night to secure her position at a prestigious corporate firm. The Bar Association Ethics Committee was notoriously conservative. The mere allegation of a compromised background supported by a disturbing audio file could stall her career indefinitely. I reached across the table and touched her hand. I told her we had to drop the lawsuit. I explained that the risk was too high. I survived 24 years in the shadows without seeking justice, and I could survive the rest of my life the same way. I refused to let my trauma become the weapon that destroyed the future I sacrificed everything to build for her. Olivia did not pull her hand away. She did not agree to surrender. She looked at me with the hardened analytical gaze of a litigator who recognized a flawed piece of evidence. She pointed at the laptop screen. She told me that blackmailers only succeed when the victim is too afraid to examine the weapon. She noted that the audio file was heavily compressed and abruptly truncated. Richard and Cynthia edited the recording to isolate my panic while removing the context. Olivia stated that a 14-year-old girl does not suffer a psychotic break in a vacuum. She wanted to know what happened during the missing seconds. She closed the laptop, pulled the flash drive, and stood up. She informed me we were not dropping the federal lawsuit. We were going to a professional recording studio. The next morning, Olivia leveraged a favor from a forensic audio engineer who occasionally consulted for her litigation firm. The studio was a soundproof bunker filled with complex mixing boards and high-resolution monitors. The engineer, a quiet man with thick headphones, uploaded the digital file into his specialized software. Olivia instructed him to strip away the compression algorithms. She asked him to isolate the background frequencies and amplify the ambient noise buried beneath my screaming and the baby crying. The engineer nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The colorful sound waves on the monitor shifted and expanded. He applied a series of digital filters isolating specific audio tracks. He explained that digital recordings capture more data than the human ear initially processes. When you remove the dominant foreground noise, the hidden environmental sounds emerge. He played the enhanced track. The recording started again, but the texture was entirely different. My frantic sobbing was muted, pushed to the back of the audio mix. The ambient sounds of the guest house took center stage. We heard the heavy, distinct sound of the solid oak door closing. We heard the sharp metallic click of a deadbolt sliding into place from the outside, the lock securing the 14-year-old girl and the infant inside the room. Then a new voice emerged from the filtered audio. It was clear, cold, and devoid of any maternal warmth. Let her cry until she figures out how to be a mother. Cynthia's voice echoed through the studio speakers, originating from the other side of the locked door. We will check on her in the morning. If she wants to live under our roof, she needs to learn responsibility. The engineer paused the playback. The heavy silence filled the soundproof room. The extortion tape was no longer a record of my teenage instability. The audio enhancement had inverted the entire narrative. The file did not prove I was an abusive guardian. It captured the exact moment a minor child was imprisoned in a room with a newborn infant by her own parents. It was a digital confession. Olivia stared at the sound waves on the monitor. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. She turned to me, holding up the flash drive. The fear that suffocated my apartment the night before vanished entirely. Richard and Cynthia thought they were delivering a threat. Olivia said, her voice ringing with lethal satisfaction. They did not realize they just handed me the smoking gun. She thanked the engineer and requested a certified copy of the unedited, isolated audio track. She explained the legal implications of the newly discovered evidence. We no longer had to rely solely on financial ledgers to prove systemic abuse. We possessed a verified time-stamped recording of Cynthia admitting to false imprisonment and child endangerment. The blackmail attempt backfired with catastrophic precision. If Richard submitted that tape to the State Bar Association, Olivia would not face an ethics hearing. Richard and Cynthia would face immediate criminal indictment for the unlawful detention of a minor. They handed us the final nail for their own coffin. Olivia dropped the flash drive into her briefcase. She checked her watch, preparing for her afternoon meetings. She informed me it was time to draft a response to her grandparents' ultimatum. We were not withdrawing the RICO lawsuit. We were expanding the charges. The retaliatory strike arrived at 7 in the morning. It did not come via a certified letter or a process server. It announced itself with the deafening roar of heavy diesel engines. I stood at the kitchen sink of the guest house holding a ceramic coffee mug. The floorboards beneath my boots began to vibrate. I looked through the window and saw a yellow front-end loader rolling up the gravel driveway. Behind it parked a white city municipal truck, flashing amber warning lights. Richard stepped out of his luxury sedan. He wore a tailored cashmere overcoat and a look of grim satisfaction. He had spent decades cultivating political leverage in the local real estate sector. When the extortion tape backfired and the federal lawsuit loomed, he decided to bypass the court system entirely. He chose to utilize the corrupt local infrastructure he still controlled to inflict immediate physical destruction. A city building inspector waddled out of the municipal truck. He carried a heavy staple gun and a bright red placard. He marched up the wooden steps of the guest house, avoiding my gaze. He raised his arm and stapled the notice directly into the center of the front door. I opened the door and read the bold black lettering. It was an emergency condemnation order. The document cited severe foundational instability and imminent structural collapse. The mandate required immediate demolition to prevent a public safety hazard. Richard orchestrated a targeted tactical strike. He bribed a local official to classify my home as a critical danger. He intended to bulldoze the guest house, turning the physical evidence of my 24-year isolation into a pile of splintered wood and crushed drywall. He wanted to erase the crime scene before federal auditors could inspect it. I walked down the wooden steps and confronted the inspector. I demanded to see the engineering report supporting the structural claims. I pointed out that the foundation stood solid for 4 decades without a single filed complaint until this exact morning. The inspector wiped sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. He refused to produce a diagnostic report. He mumbled a rehearsed line about administrative authority and signaled the heavy machinery operator to advance toward the structure. Richard stood near the edge of the driveway, checking his expensive wristwatch. He offered a cold, patronizing smile. He told me to pack whatever clothes I could carry in the next 10 minutes. He stated the county authorized the demolition, and no federal lawsuit could stop a municipal safety crew performing their civic duty. He believed brute force would finally break my endurance. I did not run inside to pack my belongings. I did not plead with my father to spare the cramped walls where I spent my youth rocking a crying infant. I turned my back to Richard and walked directly into the path of the yellow front-end loader. I stood in the center of the gravel driveway. The enormous tires crunched against the stones, stopping mere yards from my boots. The operator leaned out of the reinforced cabin, shouting down at me to clear the restricted area. I did not move. I crossed my arms and stared up at the operator. I told him he would have to drive the steel bucket straight through my chest. The diesel engine idled, sending thick plumes of dark exhaust into the crisp autumn air. The operator hesitated. He was a contracted worker paid to knock down empty structures. He was not paid to run over a civilian standing her ground on residential property. He shifted the machine into neutral and looked toward Richard for instructions. Richard's face flushed dark red. His carefully orchestrated demolition was stalling. He marched toward the machine, waving his arms and ordering the operator to proceed. He shouted that I was trespassing on an active construction zone, and the crew held zero liability for any injuries sustained by a defiant squatter. The tension stretched tight across the front lawn. The engine revved again. The metal bucket lifted a few inches off the gravel, creeping forward. Before the gears could fully engage, the shrill screech of burning rubber shattered the morning noise. 3 black luxury SUVs turned sharply off the main road and blocked the estate entrance. The vehicles moved with synchronized military precision. They parked in a tactical formation, boxing in the municipal truck and the heavy machinery transport. The doors of the lead vehicle opened. Marcus stepped out onto the driveway. He did not wear the casual weekend attire of a visiting son-in-law. He wore a razor-sharp tailored suit. His posture projected lethal corporate authority. He was flanked by 4 individuals carrying structured leather briefcases. They were not family lawyers holding mediation files. They were high-level corporate liquidators. Richard frowned, his confusion momentarily overriding his anger. He assumed Marcus arrived to salvage the fractured marriage, or perhaps intervene on behalf of Vanessa to negotiate a settlement. Richard took a step toward the venture capitalist, preparing to spin a narrative about clearing a dangerous eyesore from the family property. Marcus did not acknowledge Richard's greeting. He did not look at the main estate. He walked past his father-in-law and headed straight toward the idling front-end loader. He looked up at the operator. He instructed the man to shut the engine down immediately. The operator glanced at Richard, then back at Marcus. The commanding presence of the venture capitalist and his entourage of stern executives prompted the worker to reach for the ignition key. The diesel engine sputtered and died, leaving a sudden heavy silence in its wake. Richard closed the distance, his face twisting into a scowl. He demanded to know why Marcus was interfering with a scheduled municipal demolition on private property. He reminded Marcus that the estate belonged to the Myers family, and the guest house was a documented liability that required removal. Marcus turned to face Richard. His expression held zero warmth. He reached out and snapped his fingers. One of the corporate liquidators stepped forward and handed Marcus a thick, bound portfolio. Marcus held the portfolio in one hand and unclasped the cover. He informed Richard that the estate no longer belonged to the Myers family. Richard blinked, the words failing to register. He stammered that his name was on the deed and the mortgage was currently under negotiation with the primary lender. Marcus corrected the timeline with surgical precision. He explained that Richard had defaulted on his secondary loans months ago. The primary lender categorized the entire estate portfolio as toxic debt. Banks dislike managing toxic assets. They prefer to offload them to private equity firms, willing to assume the financial risk for a steep discount. Marcus stated that his venture capital firm finalized the purchase of the bank distressed debt portfolio late last night. He did not buy the debt to rescue his wife's family. He bought the debt to control the board. He pulled a certified assignment of deed from the portfolio and held it up. He informed Richard that his corporate entity was now the sole lien holder and primary creditor of the entire Myers estate. The color drained from Richard's cheeks. The arrogant patriarch realized the ground he was standing on was no longer his own. The illusion of his wealth evaporated in the span of 30 seconds. Marcus turned his attention to the sweating city building inspector. He warned the official that executing a demolition order on a property undergoing active corporate foreclosure without the express written consent of the primary lien holder constituted severe financial sabotage. He promised the inspector that if a single piece of wood was damaged, his firm would file a devastating civil lawsuit against the city municipal board for unauthorized destruction of corporate collateral. The inspector dropped his staple gun. He mumbled a hurried apology, scrambled into his municipal truck, and threw the vehicle into reverse. The heavy machinery operator followed suit, eager to escape the crossfire of a billionaire hostile takeover. The threat of physical destruction vanished, leaving Richard standing alone in the gravel driveway, stripped of his leverage and his property. Richard tried to salvage his dignity. He appealed to Marcus' sense of familial loyalty. He argued that they were business partners and family members. He suggested they could negotiate a restructuring plan to keep the estate intact and protect Vanessa's inheritance. Marcus looked at his father-in-law with unfiltered disgust. He stated that his marriage to Vanessa was a fraudulent transaction built on stolen funds and stolen identities. He informed Richard that the corporate liquidation process would commence by the end of the week. He turned his gaze toward me. The fierce venture capitalist offered a brief, respectful nod. He acknowledged the woman who stood in front of a bulldozer to protect her ground. He did not offer a grand speech or a sentimental apology. He simply confirmed that the guest house would remain untouched while the main estate was dismantled and sold to the highest bidder. Marcus signaled his team. The corporate liquidators returned to the SUVs. The black vehicles backed out of the driveway, leaving Richard isolated in front of the home he no longer owned. The physical attack failed. The financial shield shattered. But cornered predators do not surrender. They seek new targets. Recognizing that the estate was lost and his legacy was crumbling, Richard shifted his focus. He needed a way to delegitimize the woman orchestrating his downfall. If he could not destroy the guest house, he would attempt to destroy the origin of the child raised inside it. He prepared to summon a ghost from the past to reclaim his final piece of leverage. The failed demolition marked the end of Richard's physical intimidation. But Vanessa's desperation demanded a different approach. Marcus seized the estate debt, ensuring her financial ruin was imminent. The federal RICO investigation loomed, threatening her liberty. Stripped of her wealth and her husband's protection, Vanessa realized her only remaining asset was the narrative. If she could portray herself and her family as victims of a calculated kidnapping, she might secure enough public sympathy to derail the criminal charges. She needed a compelling victim. She needed a grieving father. 2 days after the bulldozers retreated, a face I had not seen in 2 decades appeared on the local evening news broadcasts. Senator Thomas Vance was currently running a highly publicized campaign for the governor office. He built his political brand on family values, moral integrity, and fiscal conservatism. 24 years ago, he was a young, ambitious state representative who engaged in a brief, reckless affair with my teenage sister. When the pregnancy occurred, he panicked. A scandal involving an underage girl would destroy his budding political career before it began. He relied on Richard to bury the problem. Now the problem was useful again. Vanessa contacted Vance. The details of their negotiation remain unknown, but the strategy was clear. The senator required a distraction from his lagging poll numbers, and Vanessa required a weapon to discredit our lawsuit. They struck a mutually beneficial alliance built on a foundation of lies. Vance held a press conference outside the state capitol building. He stood before a bank of microphones flanked by an expensive public relations team. He did not look like a ruthless politician. He played the role of a devastated man seeking redemption. He stared directly into the camera lenses. He confessed to a youthful indiscretion. He claimed he loved Vanessa deeply, but believed her parents when they told him she suffered a tragic miscarriage. He wiped a single practiced tear from his eye. He stated he had spent 24 years mourning a child that never existed. He then pivoted the narrative with terrifying precision. He pointed the finger of blame away from Richard and Cynthia and aimed it squarely at me. He told the media that a disturbed, isolated relative had manipulated the situation. He alleged that I stole the infant upon birth, hiding the child in a secluded guest house to fulfill a twisted maternal fantasy. He announced his intention to file an immediate petition in family court to establish his paternal rights and reclaim his stolen daughter. The media frenzy ignited instantly. The news vans parked at the end of the driveway, documenting the battle between a prominent politician and the rogue aunt accused of kidnapping his child. The legal and political spheres collided, trapping us in the center of a public spectacle. The family court hearing was expedited due to Vance's political influence. The courtroom gallery was packed with journalists, sketch artists, and political aides. The air hummed with eager anticipation. They expected a dramatic, emotional showdown. They expected a tearful reunion between a grieving father and his long-lost daughter. They underestimated the daughter. I sat at the respondent table, keeping my posture rigid. I wore a simple gray blazer. I did not attempt to match the expensive tailoring of the political operatives across the aisle. Olivia sat beside me, organizing her legal pads. She wore a charcoal suit, her demeanor projecting total professional detachment. Vance took the witness stand first. He delivered a flawless performance under direct examination by his attorney. He spoke of his profound grief, his enduring love for a child he never knew, and his relentless desire to make up for lost time. He painted a picture of a man robbed of fatherhood by a malicious, deceitful woman. He demanded full custody, emphasizing his stable home environment and his capacity to provide the elite lifestyle his daughter deserved. The gallery murmured in sympathetic agreement. The judge, a veteran magistrate with political aspirations of his own, nodded thoughtfully, taking notes. Vance finished his testimony, wiping his eyes with a pristine linen handkerchief. He believed he had won the room. The judge instructed the defense to begin cross-examination. Olivia stood up. She did not approach the podium with the hesitant demeanor of a young lawyer facing a powerful politician. She moved with the steady, calculated grace of an apex predator. She did not address Vance as father or senator. She addressed him strictly as the petitioner. She began the cross-examination with a series of simple procedural questions confirming his timeline. She established his claim that he believed the child perished 24 years ago. She verified his assertion that he remained entirely ignorant of my existence and the guest house arrangement until Vanessa contacted him earlier that week. Vance answered confidently, reaffirming his narrative. He leaned forward in the witness box, assuming the young attorney lacked the experience to challenge his polished testimony. Olivia walked back to our table. She picked up a thick bound ledger and returned to the podium. She asked the petitioner to confirm his signature on his annual campaign finance disclosure forms. She reminded him that committing perjury during a sworn deposition carried severe federal penalties. Vance frowned. The line of questioning deviated from the emotional narrative he preferred. He confirmed his signature, adding a caveat about relying on his accounting team for accuracy. Olivia opened the ledger. She requested permission to submit Exhibit A into the court record. She handed copies to the judge and the opposing counsel. She instructed Vance to turn to page 42 of the ledger. She read the highlighted section aloud. The document detailed a recurring campaign contribution deposited on the 15th of every month. The amount was exactly $10,000. The payments began 24 years ago, corresponding precisely with the month Olivia was born. The contributions continued uninterrupted for nearly 2.5 decades, ceasing only 2 weeks ago when Marcus froze the Myers family accounts. Olivia looked up from the ledger. Her eyes locked onto the politician. She asked the petitioner to identify the source of the persistent monthly contributions. She noted the funds originated from a corporate entity labeled Myers Consulting LLC. Vance shifted uncomfortably in the wooden chair. The polished veneer cracked. He cleared his throat, stammering an explanation about legitimate political donations from supportive constituents. He claimed the Myers family backed his conservative policy platform. Olivia did not let the lie stand. She pulled a second document from her file. She submitted Exhibit B. She stated that Myers Consulting LLC was not a functioning business. She explained it was a shell corporation created by Richard Myers 24 years ago. She revealed that the corporation filed 0 tax returns, claiming 0 operational revenue, and employed 0 staff. The sole purpose of the LLC was to obscure the origin of the monthly $10,000 transfers directed into Vance campaign coffers. The courtroom fell silent. The journalists stopped whispering, their pens flying across their notepads. Olivia delivered the fatal blow. She asked the petitioner a final devastating question. She asked Senator Vance if he truly mourned a miscarried child, or if he knowingly sold a living infant to his wealthy in-laws for $250,000 in guaranteed annual campaign funding. She asked him to confirm under oath if the monthly payments were not political donations, but hush money exchanged for his silence and his abandonment. Vance stared at the documents in his hands. His mouth opened, but no words emerged. The politician realized his entire career, his reputation, and his impending gubernatorial campaign were disintegrating on the public record. He was not a grieving victim. He was a corrupt official who brokered a human life for political capital. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding order, as the gallery erupted into chaos. The carefully constructed narrative of the grieving political attack backfired, exposing the deep systemic rot at the core of the Myers family alliances. Olivia gathered her files and returned to our table. She did not look at the man on the witness stand. The biological connection meant nothing. She had just dismantled her own father on the public record, securing our safety and setting the stage for the final internal fracture of the Myers family. The chaotic implosion of Senator Vance on the witness stand triggered an immediate recess. The judge struck his gavel, demanding order, as the journalists scrambled toward the heavy wooden doors, eager to file their breaking stories. The courtroom emptied rapidly, leaving the air thick with the residue of exposed corruption. We remained seated at the defense table, organizing our files. The real victory did not occur during the cross-examination. The true devastation unfolded minutes later behind the closed door of the adjacent private consultation room. The walls of the courthouse consultation rooms were thick, but they could not contain the fury erupting inside. Cynthia possessed a vicious, elitist pride. She tolerated Richard's aggressive business tactics and overlooked his abrasive demeanor because he provided the immense wealth necessary to maintain her country club status. She believed they operated as equal partners in managing the family reputation. The revelation of the campaign finance ledger shattered that illusion. Cynthia realized Richard had not just orchestrated a cover-up. He had unilaterally drained over $2 million from their joint liquid assets over the past 2 decades. He funneled a fortune to a corrupt politician without her knowledge or consent. She viewed the deception not as a moral failing, but as a catastrophic financial betrayal. Her voice pierced the heavy oak door. She shrieked, demanding to know how Richard could bleed their retirement accounts dry while she was forced to curtail her luxury spending. She yelled that his arrogant, unilateral decision-making had jeopardized her future security. Richard yelled back, his deep voice cracking under the strain of an empire in freefall. He defended his actions, citing necessity. He claimed he paid the bribe to protect Vanessa from a scandal that would have ruined her marriage prospects. He argued he was protecting the family name, the very asset Cynthia prized above all else. The alliance fractured along its weakest fault line. The Myers family operated on a foundation of transactional loyalty. When the capital evaporated, the loyalty dissolved instantly. Vanessa did not rush to defend the father who had spent 24 years covering her tracks. She calculated her odds of survival. Marcus had already seized the estate debt. The federal RICO investigation loomed. Now her parents were locked in a vicious battle over depleting resources. She recognized the sinking ship and decided to secure a lifeboat. She turned her venom toward Richard. She aligned herself with Cynthia, urging her mother to act swiftly to protect whatever individual assets remained untouched by the federal probe. She suggested that Richard's reckless financial mismanagement provided grounds for an immediate emergency divorce filing. She advised Cynthia to legally sever their assets before Richard's hidden debts consumed her personal wealth. Vanessa discarded her father the moment his utility expired. The daughter who demanded relentless protection now advocated for his financial execution to save her own skin. I sat at the defense table listening to the muffled sounds of the family tearing itself apart. I did not feel vindicated. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. I observed the destruction of the people who had engineered my isolation. Olivia did not share my quiet reflection. She was a litigator operating in the middle of a high-stakes conflict. She recognized the volatility of the situation and identified a critical tactical opportunity. She pulled her laptop from her briefcase and opened a specialized legal drafting software. She understood that a family engaged in a bitter asset dispute poses a significant flight risk. If Cynthia initiated divorce proceedings to shield her wealth, the assets would be scattered across multiple hidden accounts, complicating our ability to secure restitution in the pending civil lawsuit. Olivia typed rapidly, compiling a rapid-fire injunction. She did not wait for the opposing counsel to regroup. She drafted an ex parte emergency motion for a temporary restraining order on all liquid assets controlled by Richard, Cynthia, and Vanessa. She grounded the motion in the explosive testimony delivered just moments ago. She argued that the confirmed existence of the secret shell corporation used to funnel bribes demonstrated a clear capacity for illicit asset concealment. She stated that allowing the defendants continued access to their financial accounts posed a severe risk of immediate capital flight, hindering the ongoing RICO investigation. Olivia finalized the document, attached the digital courtroom transcripts, and electronically filed the motion directly to the judge chambers before the recess even concluded. The legal machinery moved with terrifying speed. Judges despise litigants who conceal assets and perjure themselves. The magistrate reviewed the emergency filing and granted the temporary restraining order without requesting a secondary hearing. The financial freeze was executed instantaneously. Automated digital protocols locked down every account bearing the Myers name. The wealth that insulated them from consequence was revoked in a matter of seconds. The recess ended. The courtroom doors opened, and the opposing counsel filed back in looking haggard and defeated. Richard, Cynthia, and Vanessa followed. They did not sit together. They occupied the far edges of the respondent table, avoiding eye contact, projecting a stark portrait of a broken syndicate. The judge took his seat at the bench. He did not address the custody petition or the disastrous cross-examination. He looked down at the respondents and informed them he had just signed an emergency asset freeze. He explained the parameters of the order. All banking accounts, investment portfolios, and lines of credit were suspended indefinitely pending a full forensic audit. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Cynthia gasped, clutching her designer handbag. Richard stared blankly at the judge, unable to process the total loss of control. The judge struck his gavel, adjourning the session for the day. He advised the respondents to seek immediate financial counsel, though he doubted they possessed the resources to retain one. I gathered my files and walked out of the courtroom with Olivia. We navigated the marble corridor, ignoring the murmurs of the remaining journalists. The heavy double doors of the courthouse entrance loomed ahead. As we approached the security checkpoint, I noticed a small commotion near the courthouse cafeteria kiosk. Vanessa stood in front of the cash register, holding a sleek black credit card. The machine beeped, displaying a bright red declined notification. She frowned, pulling a second card from her wallet. She swiped it. The machine beeped again. Declined. Cynthia stood beside her, clutching a bottled water. She snapped at the cashier, demanding he run the card manually, blaming a system error. The cashier, a tired municipal employee, shook his head and stated the terminal was functioning perfectly. Richard stood a few paces away. He reached into his pocket, hoping to find a few stray bills to resolve the humiliating standoff. He pulled his hand out empty. The man who had funneled millions through shell corporations and bought the silence of state politicians did not possess $3 in physical currency. The three of them stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light of the courthouse lobby. The reality of the asset freeze had materialized in the most mundane, devastating manner possible. They could not purchase a bottle of water or a cup of coffee. The wealth that defined their existence, that permitted them to lock a teenager in a guest house and steal a child's future, was gone. They were entirely powerless. I did not stop to gloat. I did not offer a pitying glance. I walked past the kiosk with steady, measured steps. The battle was won, but the final execution still awaited us in the deposition room. The financial destruction was complete. It was time to secure the legal confession. The spectacle in the courthouse cafeteria was a prelude to the true execution. Stripping the Myers family of their financial insulation left them vulnerable, but the civil lawsuit required sworn testimony to guarantee the final judgment. We needed to extract the truth not through financial audits, but through a grueling legal interrogation. The venue shifted from the public courtroom to a secure private deposition room downtown. The space was claustrophobic. 4 stark white walls surrounded a long, heavy conference table. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning unit and the rhythmic clatter of the court reporter stenography machine. Vanessa was summoned to testify under oath. She arrived looking haggard. The flawless styling she meticulously maintained was gone. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and she wore an unassuming dark blouse. She sat next to a junior public defender, having exhausted the funds required to retain her ruthless defense attorney. I sat at the far end of the table observing. Olivia occupied the primary interrogator seat. She sat directly across from the woman who gave birth to her. The physical resemblance between them was undeniable, but their demeanors existed in opposing universes. Vanessa projected defensive, panicked energy. Olivia radiated cold, lethal stillness. The deposition began at 9 in the morning. Olivia did not ease into the questioning. She bypassed the standard pleasantries and launched a relentless tactical assault. She operated with the precision of a seasoned litigator dissecting a hostile witness. She possessed every financial document, every forged signature, and every hidden bank ledger, tracing back 24 years. Olivia started with the identity theft. She presented the original student loan applications bearing my forged signature. She asked Vanessa to confirm her enrollment at the Ivy League University during the specified dates. She forced Vanessa to review the disbursement logs, matching the stolen funds directly to her tuition payments and luxury housing accommodations. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. She attempted to deflect, relying on ignorance. She claimed her parents managed all the finances, and she merely signed the paperwork placed in front of her without reading the details. Olivia did not accept the evasion. She tightened the vise. She presented a series of internal emails between Vanessa and the University Financial Aid Office. The emails proved Vanessa actively coordinated the disbursement schedules, acknowledging the origin of the loans. She was a knowing, active participant in the fraud that destroyed my credit. The junior public defender advised Vanessa to invoke her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Vanessa, glaring at Olivia, refused the counsel. Her arrogant pride demanded she control the narrative. She argued that the statute of limitations on the financial crimes had expired, rendering the questions irrelevant. Olivia leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. She clarified the legal parameters. She explained that while criminal statutes may have lapsed, the civil damages in a RICO investigation encompass the entire timeline of the continuous criminal enterprise. She stated the questioning was entirely relevant to establishing the pattern of ongoing fraud. The interrogation ground on. Hour after hour, Olivia dismantled the carefully constructed life of the socialite. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. The court reporter fingers flew across the keys, capturing every evasion, every stammered excuse, every lie. By 3 in the afternoon, the focus shifted from the distant past to the immediate present. Olivia presented the internal banking logs acquired from Marcus venture capital firm. She laid out the evidence of the embezzlement. She asked Vanessa to confirm her unauthorized access to the corporate discretionary accounts. She detailed the specific transfers Vanessa executed to secretly pay the mounting interest on Richard's secondary mortgages. The composure Vanessa maintained throughout the morning evaporated. The exposure of the embezzlement struck a different nerve. This was not a crime committed decades ago against a sister she despised. This was a current act of betrayal against the billionaire husband who provided her elite status. Sweat beaded on Vanessa's forehead. She slammed her hand flat against the heavy table. The sudden noise startled the junior attorney. Vanessa raised her voice, the polished veneer cracking open to reveal raw, panicked desperation. She shrieked that she only initiated the transfers because she had to protect the family estate. She claimed Marcus possessed more money than he could ever spend, and he would not have noticed the missing funds. She yelled that she deserved to live in the lifestyle she built, and she was not going to let a temporary cash flow problem destroy her social standing. Olivia did not flinch at the outburst. She maintained eye contact, her expression entirely neutral. She let the silence stretch, forcing Vanessa to sit with the magnitude of her own confession. Then Olivia delivered the decisive strike. She shifted the line of questioning away from the financial ledgers. She asked Vanessa to explain the underlying motivation for the continuous systemic deception. She asked why a family possessing immense resources chose to isolate an infant in a guest house and saddle a teenage girl with crushing, fraudulent debt. Vanessa's breathing turned shallow. The pressure of the 8-hour interrogation, the undeniable documentary evidence, and the suffocating environment of the deposition room broke her psychological defenses. She glared at Olivia, her eyes wide and manic. She abandoned all legal caution. The venom she harbored for 2 decades finally spilled out onto the official record. You want to know why she screamed, her voice echoing off the stark white walls? Because I never wanted you. I never wanted to be a mother. You were a mistake, a burden that threatened to ruin my entire life before it even started. The junior public defender grabbed Vanessa's arm urgently, whispering for her to stop talking. Vanessa violently shoved his hand away. She leaned across the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at Olivia's face. My parents forced me to carry the pregnancy, she yelled. They refused to let me handle it quietly because they were terrified of a scandal leaking to their conservative country club friends. They forced me to have you, and then they dumped you on Harper so nobody would know the golden child made a mistake. You were nothing but a liability they forced me to keep to protect their reputation. The court reporter machine clattered, capturing every single devastating word. The room fell into a heavy, chilling silence. The raw, unfiltered cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Vanessa had not just confessed to financial crimes. She provided an undeniable sworn statement confirming willful, systematic abandonment. She officially nullified any potential defense, claiming the guest house arrangement was an unconventional but loving, familial agreement. She admitted the entire setup was a calculated strategy to protect her reputation at the expense of her own child and her sister. I looked at Olivia. She absorbed the vicious words spoken by the woman who gave birth to her. She did not cry. She did not look away. She sat with perfect posture. She had extracted the exact confession required to secure a massive civil judgment in the RICO lawsuit. The emotional detachment she displayed was profound and terrifying. Olivia calmly checked her notes. She looked at the court reporter, requesting confirmation that the previous statement was accurately recorded. The reporter nodded. Olivia closed her legal pad. She announced she had no further questions for the deponent. She concluded the session. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, her chest heaving. The adrenaline faded, leaving the crushing realization of what she had just placed onto the permanent legal record. She had handed us the weapon to destroy her completely. We gathered our files and exited the deposition room. The victory was comprehensive. We possessed the financial evidence, the extortion tape, and now a sworn confession of abandonment. The civil trial appeared to be a mere formality. The Myers family possessed no remaining defenses. But as we walked toward the elevator, I received an urgent text message from the managing director of my appraisal firm. He attached a scanned copy of a legal document just delivered to his office by a courier. Richard was bankrupt, isolated, and stripped of his assets, but he was a man who spent his life manipulating the legal system. He recognized that the RICO lawsuit hinged on proving a pattern of ongoing criminal activity, specifically the identity theft that funded Vanessa's education. I opened the attachment. It was a scanned copy of a contract. The document bore my signature dated 20 years ago when I turned 18. The text above the signature line explicitly stated that I voluntarily assumed full financial responsibility for the $250,000 student loan debt in exchange for the permanent exclusive right to raise Olivia in the guest house without interference. I stared at the screen, the blood freezing in my veins. I had never signed that document. I had never seen that contract in my life. Yet the signature sprawling across the bottom of the yellowed page was unmistakably mine. Richard had planted a final lethal trap designed to dismantle the entire foundation of our lawsuit. The scanned document glowing on my phone screen felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. We stood in the courthouse elevator, the metal doors sliding shut, locking us in a descending steel box. The elation of extracting Vanessa's confession vanished instantly. The piece of paper Richard submitted to the court possessed the power to unravel our entire legal strategy. If the judge validated the contract, the systemic fraud narrative anchoring the RICO lawsuit collapsed. The narrative would shift from identity theft to a voluntary, albeit tragic, familial agreement. Richard and Cynthia would be cleared of the most severe financial charges. I handed the phone to Olivia. She studied the digital image. Her eyes narrowed, tracking the text detailing the exchange of a $250,000 debt for the custody of a child. She did not panic. She zoomed in on the signature line. She asked me directly if I possessed any memory of signing a custody agreement when I turned 18. I shook my head, my mind racing through the chaotic fog of my early 20s. I told her I signed nothing. I was too busy working night shifts and navigating pediatric asthma attacks to engage in formal legal negotiations with my parents. I avoided Richard and Cynthia entirely hiding in the guest house. But the signature. I stared at the sprawling cursive on the screen, the looping H, the sharp crossing of the T. It was undeniably my handwriting. It was not a clumsy imitation. It was a perfect match. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Olivia strode out her pace, quick and decisive. She dialed the judge chambers requesting an emergency 48-hour continuance based on the sudden submission of unverified evidentiary documents. The clerk granted the delay, setting a rigid countdown. We had exactly 2 days to prove a perfect signature was a lie. We relocated our base of operations to the secure conference room inside my real estate appraisal firm. The large space provided ample tables to spread out documents and access to high-resolution imaging scanners. We ordered takeout food and locked the doors. We printed a high-quality physical copy of the scanned contract. We laid it flat on the conference table under the harsh glare of a heavy desk lamp. We spent the first 6 hours analyzing the legal language. The phrasing was dense, utilizing archaic terminology favored by attorneys practicing in the late 90s. It was exactly the kind of contract Richard, a man entrenched in old-school real estate law, would draft. But proving Richard authored the document did not invalidate my signature at the bottom. Midnight approached. The city outside the window grew quiet. The coffee cups piled up on the table. The fatigue gnawed at my focus, but the stakes demanded relentless attention. I leaned over the table, staring at the printed copy until the letters blurred. I focused intensely on the signature itself. I ignored the typed legal text and studied the blue ink, the sprawling cursive, the pressure points, the specific curvature of the letters. A faint memory tugged at the edge of my consciousness. It was a memory disconnected from courtrooms and legal battles. It was a memory anchored in the mundane reality of high school. I asked Olivia to hand me a magnifying glass. I inspected the color of the ink depicted in the high-resolution scan. It was not a standard black or a generic ballpoint blue. It possessed a distinct deep navy hue with a slight metallic sheen. The memory crystallized. I recalled a specific brand of gel pens. I bought a pack of them during my sophomore year of high school. I loved the dark navy color. I used those pens obsessively for exactly 1 academic year before they ran out of ink and the local stationery store stopped stocking them. I looked up at Olivia. The pieces of the puzzle aligned in my mind, forming a picture of terrifying, calculated deception. I told her I knew where the signature came from. I explained the timeline regarding the navy gel pens. I stated I only used that specific ink during my sophomore year when I was 15 years old. The contract Richard submitted was dated 3 years later on my 18th birthday. Olivia's eyes widened, understanding the implication immediately. She stated that Richard and Cynthia did not forge my handwriting. They stole an authentic signature from a historical document and transposed it onto the fraudulent contract. We needed the source document. We needed to find the original piece of paper bearing that exact signature to prove the transposition. We drove to the guest house at 2 in the morning. The structure remained intact, protected by Marcus' corporate injunction. We bypassed the living area and headed straight for the cramped attic storage space. I kept meticulous records of my sparse childhood. I saved report cards, school assignments, and medical slips, organizing them in plastic storage bins. It was a coping mechanism, a way to prove I existed in a family that tried to erase me. We hauled 3 heavy bins down the attic stairs. We sat on the living room floor, surrounded by dust and memories sifting through years of paperwork. We discarded the math tests and the middle school essays. We focused exclusively on documents from my sophomore year bearing my signature in navy ink. Dawn broke, casting a gray light through the guest house windows. My hands were coated in dust. Near the bottom of the final bin, Olivia pulled out a faded manila folder labeled High School Field Trips. She opened the cover. Inside sat a stack of permission slips. She spread them across the floor. We scanned the signatures. One specific document caught my eye. It was a permission slip for an overnight biology field trip to a state marine facility. My parents refused to sign it, citing the inconvenience. I forged my own signature, assuming responsibility to ensure I could attend. I picked up the permission slip. The signature was executed in the distinct dark navy gel ink. Olivia placed the printed copy of the fraudulent contract right next to the permission slip. We compared the 2 signatures. The match was not just similar, it was identical. The spatial dimensions, the slight hesitation on the upward stroke of the P, the exact length of the final tail. It was a precise mirror image. Olivia pulled out a transparent plastic ruler. She measured the distance between the letters. She verified the identical proportions. Human beings never sign their names exactly the same way twice. There are always microscopic variations in pressure and angle. A flawless, identical match across 2 documents separated by 3 years of time is an empirical impossibility. Richard did not forge the signature. He photocopied the permission slip, utilized a primitive thermal transfer technique to lift the ink, and press the authentic signature onto the bottom of his typed contract. He backdated the document, assuming the perfect visual match would withstand basic judicial scrutiny. He assumed I did not retain the original source material. He assumed the passage of 2 decades would obscure the mechanical deception. He was wrong. Olivia took photographs of the comparison. She carefully placed the permission slip into a protective plastic sleeve. The exhaustion of the sleepless night vanished, replaced by the electric surge of possessing the definitive kill shot. We did not just have evidence to invalidate the contract. We possessed the physical proof to indict Richard for aggravated forgery, evidence tampering, and perjury in a federal proceeding. He handed us the rope to hang him. We packed the documents into the briefcase. We had 24 hours until the court reconvened. We did not need more time to build a defense. We needed the time to secure a specialized expert witness who could present the forensic reality to the judge and drive the final nail into the Myers family coffin. The 48-hour recess expired. The doors of the federal courtroom swung open onto a scene radically different from the initial hearings. The presence of the RICO statute, combined with the explosive political fallout from Senator Vance's testimony, transformed our family dispute into a high-profile media circus. Journalists packed the gallery. Sketch artists occupied the front rows. The air buzzed with the frantic energy of a looming execution. Richard sat at the defense table. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, attempting to project his old aristocratic authority. He offered confident nods to his remaining legal team, believing the forged contract shielded him from the federal racketeering charges. Cynthia sat rigidly beside him, her hands clasped tightly, attempting to maintain the facade of a wronged matriarch. Vanessa sat isolated at the end of the table, staring blankly at the polished wood. I took my seat beside Olivia. We did not bring a mountain of paperwork today. We brought one specialized folder and 2 key individuals waiting in the witness anteroom. The time for arguing legal theory was over. The time for empirical destruction had arrived. The judge called the session to order. He instructed the defense to present their argument regarding the validity of the submitted custody contract. Richard, lead attorney, approached the podium. He delivered a polished practice speech. He characterized the contract as a tragic but legally binding familial agreement. He argued that I willingly accepted the $250,000 debt in exchange for maternal rights, absolving his clients of any financial crimes or identity theft. He requested the immediate dismissal of the RICO charges based on this exonerating evidence. Olivia did not object during the speech. She let the attorney build his narrative high, creating a longer drop for the inevitable fall. When the defense concluded, the judge turned to our table, offering Olivia the floor for cross-examination. Olivia stood up, adjusting her jacket. She walked to the podium empty-handed. She did not bother cross-examining the defense attorney. She directly addressed the bench, requesting permission to call an expert witness to evaluate the physical integrity of the submitted evidence. The judge granted the request. The courtroom doors opened, and Dr. Eris Thorne walked in. Dr. Thorne was a premier forensic document examiner frequently retained by the FBI to analyze counterfeit currency and forged corporate bonds. He took the witness stand, swore the oath, and adjusted his glasses. Olivia approached the witness box. She requested the clerk project high-resolution scans of both the contested contract and the high school permission slip onto the large dual monitors facing the gallery and the judge. She asked Dr. Thorne to explain his findings regarding the signature on the contested contract. Dr. Thorne did not use legal jargon. He spoke with the clinical precision of a scientist. He detailed his use of multispectral imaging and chemical ink analysis. He stated that while the signature itself was formed by human hands, it was not organically applied to the contract paper. He pointed a laser pointer at the magnified screen. He highlighted microscopic pixelation around the edges of the ink stroke. He explained the phenomenon known as thermal ghosting. He testified that the signature on the contract was mechanically lifted from an older source document using a primitive heat transfer process and pressed onto the new page. Olivia directed his attention to the second monitor, displaying the permission slip. She asked if he could identify the source document. Dr. Thorne confirmed without hesitation. He presented a biometric overlay mapping the two signatures on top of one another. The digital lines matched flawlessly. He explained the mathematical impossibility of a human being replicating a signature with exact microscopic precision across a 3-year time gap. He concluded his testimony by stating categorically that the contract was a fabricated document manufactured through physical forgery. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. The journalist typed frantically, capturing the expert demolition of the defense primary shield. Richard gripped the edge of his table. The confident facade cracked. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously, demanding the lawyer object to the expert methodology. The attorney shook his head, recognizing a lost cause. Olivia thanked Dr. Thorne and dismissed him from the stand. She turned back to the judge. She stated that proving the document was forged was sufficient to invalidate the contract. However, proving who facilitated the forgery was necessary to establish the criminal intent required for the RICO charges. She requested permission to call her final witness. The judge motioned for the bailiff to open the anteroom door. A frail, nervous man entered the courtroom. He wore a rumpled suit and kept his head bowed. He walked toward the witness stand with trembling steps. Cynthia let out a sharp, audible gasp. She recognized the man instantly. The witness was Arthur Vance, no relation to the disgraced senator. Arthur was a retired notary public and a former country club associate of Cynthia. He was the man whose official seal and signature validated the forged contract, stamping it with state authority. Olivia approached the podium. She did not employ a harsh, interrogating tone. She spoke calmly, guiding the terrified man through the testimony. She asked Arthur to confirm his notary seal on the document. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper, confirming the stamp belonged to him. She asked him to detail the circumstances surrounding the notarization process. She reminded him that committing perjury in a federal court carried severe mandatory sentencing. Arthur's hands shook visibly on the wooden railing of the witness box. He looked at Cynthia, avoiding Richard's furious glare. The notary confessed he had not witnessed my signature. He stated he had not seen me in over a decade. He explained that Richard approached him 6 months ago, desperate for a favor. Richard brought the fabricated contract possessing the transferred signature. Richard demanded Arthur apply his official notary stamp and backdate the certification by 14 years, making the document appear legitimate. Olivia asked Arthur why he agreed to commit a felony for the Myers family. Arthur swallowed hard, staring at the floor. He admitted he was coerced. He revealed he was facing severe financial difficulties and possessed a history of offshore tax evasion. He stated he was contacted by representatives of a powerful venture capital firm holding extensive dossiers on his illegal activities. He was offered a stark choice: testify truthfully about the backdated notary stamp or face immediate exposure and federal prosecution for tax fraud. Marcus had utilized his corporate intelligence network to identify the weak link in Richard's forgery scheme. He leveraged his power to squeeze the truth out of the corrupt notary, delivering the final witness directly to our legal team. Arthur's testimony dismantled the last remaining pillar of the Myers defense. He provided a sworn confession detailing Richard's active coordination of document forgery, evidence tampering, and subornation of perjury. The contract was not just invalid, it was the centerpiece of a fresh criminal indictment. The courtroom descended into chaos. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. He instructed the court officers to immediately impound the forged contract and refer the testimony to the United States Attorney Office for criminal prosecution. The civil racketeering trial was effectively over. The defense possessed no standing, no credibility, and no remaining assets. The systemic identity theft, the embezzlement, and the extortion were proven beyond a shadow of a legal doubt. I looked at the defense table. The destruction of the Myers syndicate was absolute. Richard's face was drained of all color, his mouth hanging open in silent shock as he realized he was destined for a federal prison cell. Cynthia buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly, mourning the permanent loss of her elite status and her freedom. Vanessa sat motionless. She did not cry. She did not yell. She stared straight ahead, her expression entirely blank. She resembled a porcelain statue shattered beyond repair. She had sacrificed her child, her sister, and her integrity to maintain a flawless illusion, and now she possessed nothing. The judge declared a recess to finalize the catastrophic civil judgments. The trial reached its climax, delivering a brutal, total victory. But the legal bloodbath resolved only the public crimes. The personal betrayals required a different kind of execution. We exited the courtroom preparing for the final severing of ties and the ultimate reclamation of our stolen lives. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind us, sealing the fate of the Myers family within the judicial record. The corridor outside bustled with journalists rushing to file their stories and attorneys reviewing their notes. The air felt thick, charged with the residual energy of a brutal legal dismantling. We walked down the marble hallway, heading toward the elevators. The victory was comprehensive, but a lingering sense of unfinished business remained. The federal court addressed the identity theft and the forged documents, but the personal reckoning for Vanessa's deception still awaited its execution. A figure emerged from the quiet alcove near the elevator banks. Marcus stepped into our path. He wore a sharp-tailored suit projecting the immaculate authority of a venture capitalist who had just neutralized a significant corporate liability. He did not look angry or vengeful. He looked resolved. Behind us, the courtroom doors opened again. Vanessa stepped out, accompanied by her junior public defender. Her posture lacked the aristocratic arrogance she had wielded for a decade. She looked diminished, her eyes darting around the hallway seeking an escape route. She saw Marcus standing near the elevators. A flicker of desperate hope illuminated her exhausted face. She believed the man who had funded her luxurious lifestyle for 10 years might offer a final lifeline regardless of the devastating public revelations. She assumed the bond of marriage might supersede the financial betrayal. She abandoned her lawyer and hurried down the corridor toward her husband. She reached out, preparing to launch into a rehearsed monologue of tearful apologies and manipulated context. She intended to blame her parents for the embezzlement and beg Marcus to protect her from the impending criminal indictments. Marcus raised a single hand, halting her approach. He did not raise his voice or create a public scene. Billionaires do not engage in screaming matches in courthouse hallways. They execute their judgments with cold, sterile paperwork. He reached into his leather portfolio and extracted a slim blue folder. He did not hand it to Vanessa. He handed it directly to her junior attorney who had jogged to catch up with his client. Marcus spoke with a voice devoid of any emotional attachment. He informed Vanessa that the folder contained the finalized execution of their prenuptial agreement. He explained the mechanics of her financial termination. He detailed a specific morality clause embedded within the original marital contract. The clause stipulated that any verified instance of severe financial fraud or criminal deception resulting in material damage to his corporate entities triggered an immediate unilateral forfeiture of all spousal support alimony and shared assets. Vanessa froze, staring at the blue folder in her attorney hands. She struggled to comprehend the speed of her dispossession. She stammered, asking what the documents meant for their shared properties and bank accounts. Marcus delivered the reality check with surgical precision. He stated the morality clause nullified her access to the marital estate. She was stripped of her equity in the venture capital firm. The biometric locks on their primary residence were reprogrammed during the court recess. The luxury vehicles leased under her name were reported stolen and currently being impounded. The black credit cards sitting in her designer handbag were deactivated an hour ago. He told her she was walking out of a 10-year marriage with exactly what she brought into it. Nothing but a fabricated identity and a stolen education. The weight of the severance crushed Vanessa's final illusion. The wealth and status she had sacrificed her own child to maintain evaporated in the span of 30 seconds. The panic she had suppressed throughout the grueling deposition finally broke surface. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of Marcus' tailored jacket. The refined socialite vanished, replaced by a terrified, desperate woman facing utter ruin. She wept openly, her voice echoing down the marble corridor. She begged him to reconsider, pleading for mercy. She invoked their decade together, crying that she loved him and only stole the money to protect their perfect life from her parents' reckless debts. Marcus looked down at the hand clutching his sleeve. He did not display anger or pity. He exhibited the clinical disgust of a man removing a parasite. He reached up and gently but firmly detached her fingers from his jacket. He stepped back, creating a physical boundary between his empire and her wreckage. He looked her directly in the eyes, delivering a final, devastating verdict. He told her that her concept of loyalty was transactional and her affection was a performance. He stated that the value of their marriage had been meticulously calculated and priced at the exact amount of capital she embezzled from his firm. He informed her the transaction was complete and the game was officially over. Vanessa collapsed. She did not stumble or lean against the wall. Her knees gave out entirely, and she sank onto the cold marble floor of the courthouse hallway. The woman who had sneered at me from the comfort of her emerald silk dress now sat sobbing uncontrollably, her designer clothes pooling around her on the dirty tile. She possessed no wealth, no family, and no future. Her social execution was absolute. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, smoothing the fabric of his jacket. He did not look down at the weeping woman on the floor again. He turned his attention to Olivia and me. The fierce venture capitalist offered a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, recognizing the strategic brilliance required to dismantle an entrenched syndicate. He acknowledged the women who had exposed the rot hidden within his own house and provided the leverage necessary to execute a clean corporate extraction. He turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving the courthouse and the ruined Myers family behind him. The personal betrayals were settled. The financial empires were decoupled. Vanessa was left to face the incoming federal indictments without a shield. But the final act of reclamation still awaited us. We needed to address the physical epicenter of my 24-year isolation. The corporate takeover of the Myers estate was finalized during the trial. It was time to return to the property and deliver the ultimate eviction notice. The gavel falling in the courtroom secured the financial judgment, but extracting millions of dollars from a family skilled in hiding wealth required a different tier of tactical warfare. Richard and Cynthia did not intend to pay the court-ordered restitution for the decades of identity theft. 48 hours after the civil verdict, they executed a maneuver they believed would render our victory hollow. They filed for federal bankruptcy protection. They assumed the automatic judicial stay would halt all collection efforts. Furthermore, they believed their crown jewel was untouchable. Decades ago, Richard transferred the deed of the sprawling family mansion into a private limited liability company. He structured the corporation specifically to shield his primary residence from personal creditors. I thought he could wipe away the civil judgment through bankruptcy while continuing to sleep in his luxurious master bedroom. He underestimated the brilliant lawyer standing beside me. Olivia anticipated the bankruptcy filing before the trial even concluded. She did not waste time pursuing standard collection agencies or filing endless appeals in bankruptcy court. She utilized her sharp corporate litigation background to bypass his defenses entirely. She filed a targeted motion arguing that the specific holding company owning the mansion was not a legitimate business entity. She presented evidence proving Richard used that exact corporate structure to funnel the stolen student loan funds and launder the bribes paid to the local politician. Because the shell corporation facilitated the racketeering enterprise, the federal judge authorized an immediate piercing of the corporate veil. The court did not order Richard to pay us cash. The court ordered the forced liquidation and direct transfer of the corporate shares to satisfy the financial damages. We drove through the familiar wrought iron gates of the estate on a quiet Thursday morning. The sprawling manicured lawns looked exactly as they had when I was a teenager, trapped in the drafty guest house out back. We parked our vehicle near the grand entrance. A large commercial moving truck idled in the circular driveway. We walked through the heavy oak double doors. The foyer was littered with cardboard boxes and packing tape. Richard and Cynthia stood in the center of the sunken living room. They were directing a crew of tired movers, instructing them to wrap expensive oil paintings in crystal vases. They were downsizing their luxury items to pay their initial bankruptcy filing fees, but their demeanor remained steeped in aristocratic entitlement. They believed they were weathering a temporary storm. They believed the fortress still belonged to them. Richard noticed our arrival. He stopped pointing at a chandelier and turned his attention to us. He did not look frightened. He puffed out his chest, projecting the false confidence of a man who thought he held a trump card. He marched toward us, demanding we exit his property immediately. He cited his recent legal filings, warning us that any attempt to collect a debt while under a federal bankruptcy stay constituted severe harassment. He smirked, telling Olivia her expensive law degree failed to teach her basic financial statutes. Olivia did not argue. She did not raise her voice to match his bluster. She walked past him and approached the large glass coffee table in the center of the room. It was the exact same table where my mother had placed the eviction notice weeks earlier. Olivia unclasped her leather briefcase. She withdrew a single crisp folder and placed it on the glass surface. She informed Richard that she was not there to collect a debt. She explained the mechanics of the recent federal ruling. She detailed how his attempt to hide behind a corporate shield backfired. She stated that the court stripped him of his shares in the holding company and transferred the controlling equity to satisfy the civil judgment. She watched his smug expression falter as the legal terminology registered in his mind. Olivia slid a notarized certificate of ownership out of the folder. She pushed it across the glass table. She told Richard he was no longer standing in his own living room. She informed him that the new managing entity of the property required the premises cleared by sundown. She stated the moving truck parked outside was a convenient coincidence because he needed to pack everything he owned into it today. Cynthia dropped a porcelain figurine. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending sharp white shards across the room. She stared at the paperwork, her hands trembling. The reality of losing the mansion, the ultimate symbol of her perceived superiority, fractured her mind. She turned to Richard, begging him to deploy a legal loophole to stop the seizure. She demanded he call his attorneys to block the transfer. Richard ignored her pleading. He stepped toward the coffee table and picked up the certificate. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, searching for an error or a procedural misstep. His hands shook, rattling the thick paper. He read the verified seal from the county clerk office. He read the name of the newly established holding company designated as the sole owner of the estate. He looked up, his face drained of all color. The arrogant patriarch vanished, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He stammered, struggling to form a coherent sentence. He looked at the young lawyer who had systematically dismantled his empire over the past several months. He asked Olivia who controlled the new corporate entity. He demanded to know who held the deed to his house. Olivia smiled. It was a calm, triumphant expression, devoid of any cruelty, but filled with unyielding justice. She took a slow, deliberate step backward, clearing the space between us. She gestured toward me with an open hand. She looked Richard straight in the eyes and delivered the final, crushing blow. "She is the sole proprietor of the holding company," Olivia said, her voice ringing clear through the silent room. "The owner is my mother." The devastation on Richard and Cynthia's faces was profound. They stood paralyzed among their half-packed boxes, unable to process the magnitude of their defeat. They realized the ultimate consequence of their decades of deception. The teenage girl they banished to the backyard, the daughter they saddled with fraudulent debt and treated like a shameful secret, now held the legal deed to the very ground beneath their feet. Their pride was eradicated. Cynthia let out a quiet, ragged sob. She sank onto a nearby velvet chair, covering her face with her hands. The pristine socialite who cared only for appearances was reduced to weeping in front of the moving crew. Richard dropped the certificate back onto the glass table. He did not issue any further threats. He did not yell. He turned his back to us and walked slowly toward the hallway, accepting the irrefutable reality of his eviction. The scales of justice tipped, delivering a flawless, undeniable victory. The empire built on stolen identities and extortion was legally transferred into my possession. I stood in the grand living room looking at the sweeping staircase and the high vaulted ceilings. The space no longer felt like a fortress designed to keep me out. It felt like a monument to the endurance and resilience required to survive the people who built it. I looked at Olivia. She nodded, packing her briefcase with precise, efficient movements. The corporate execution was complete. The legal battle was finalized. We possessed the property, the financial restitution, and the unassailable truth. But the emotional resolution required one final act. We needed to formally close the door on the past before we could fully step into the future we had secured. We left Richard and Cynthia to pack their belongings, preparing for the final symbolic confrontation that would sever our ties to the Myers family forever. The corporate takeover of the estate stripped Richard and Cynthia of their legal rights, but their deeply ingrained entitlement refused to die quietly. The commercial movers hauled the large furniture out the front doors, packing away the sofas, the dining tables, and the antique rugs that now belonged to the holding company. Amidst the organized chaos of the foreclosure, Richard and Cynthia lingered near the built-in display cabinets in the grand hallway. They believed they could salvage the smaller, expensive items. I watched Richard slip a silver pocket watch into the inner pocket of his jacket. I saw Cynthia hurriedly stuffing velvet jewelry boxes into her oversized designer handbag. They operated under the delusion that their status granted them an exemption from the consequences of their fraud. They thought they could walk out of the mansion with stolen fragments of their shattered wealth. Olivia stepped forward, her posture rigid and unforgiving. She did not raise her voice to scold them. She utilized the cold authority of a seasoned litigator. She informed Richard that the asset seizure mandated by the federal judge encompassed all items of significant monetary value located within the property lines. She stated that pocketing the silver watch constituted theft of corporate assets. She ordered him to place the item back on the shelf, or she would instruct the remaining sheriff deputies parked outside to conduct a full physical search of his person. Richard froze, his hand hovering near his chest. The veins in his neck bulged. He glared at the young woman he once treated as a shameful secret. He slowly reached into his jacket, extracted the silver timepiece, and dropped it onto the wooden shelf. It landed with a dull metallic clink. Cynthia, mirroring his defeat, reluctantly emptied her handbag, leaving the velvet boxes behind. The resistance was broken. They possessed no legal maneuvering room and no financial leverage. I walked toward them carrying something I retrieved from the kitchen pantry. I did not carry a clipboard or a legal folder. I held 2 heavy rolls of industrial black plastic trash bags. I stopped a few feet away from the people who orchestrated my lifelong isolation. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults or demand an apology they were incapable of giving. The time for arguing expired years ago. I tossed the 2 rolls of black plastic onto the polished hardwood floor. They landed right at the tips of Richard's expensive leather shoes. Richard looked down at the plastic rolls and then up at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He asked what I expected him to do with garbage bags. I looked him straight in the eyes. I maintained a steady, quiet tone, ensuring every single word carried the weight of a 2-decade-long reckoning. I reminded him of a cold night 24 years ago. I recounted the exact memory. I told him how he and Cynthia marched into my childhood bedroom carrying a crying newborn infant. I described how they shoved my clothes, my school books, and my entire future into cheap black trash bags. I detailed how they handed me the plastic sacks, marched me out the back door, and pushed me into the drafty guest house before turning the lock from the outside. I gestured to the rolls resting on the floor. "You packed my entire life and a newborn baby into garbage bags," I said, my voice ringing clear through the cavernous hallway. "You threw us away because we were an inconvenience to your perfect reputation. Now the dynamic is inverted. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever basic personal clothing fits inside those bags. When the hour is up, you will carry your trash bags out the front door, and you will step off my property forever." Cynthia let out a sharp, trembling gasp. The symbolic humiliation struck her harder than the legal judgments. The pristine socialite who spent her life judging the attire and pedigree of her country club peers was being ordered to transport her belongings in refuse sacks. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched. She abandoned her arrogant pride and attempted to weaponize maternal guilt one final time. She pleaded with me, calling me her daughter. She begged me not to subject them to such a degrading exit. She claimed they provided me with life and asked for a shred of basic dignity in return. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I stared at the woman who stole my Social Security number to fund her favorite child education. I told her she forfeited the right to call me her daughter the moment she forged my signature on $250,000 of fraudulent debt. I stated I was treating her with the exact level of dignity she demonstrated to a 14-year-old girl holding an abandoned infant. I checked my watch. I informed them they now had 58 minutes remaining. Richard realized the futility of further negotiation. The stern patriarch stooped down his joints, popping in the quiet room, and picked up the rolls of plastic. He handed one to his weeping wife. The next hour unfolded as a portrait of absolute poetic justice. Olivia and I stood near the grand staircase, watching the architects of our suffering pack their lives away. The visual contrast was stunning. Cynthia stood in her expansive walk-in closet, tearing the black plastic bags open. Her hands shook as she pulled designer dresses and silk blouses from their velvet hangers, shoving them unceremoniously into the dark sacks. The expensive fabrics wrinkled and bunched, stripped of their glamour. Richard navigated his mahogany study, tossing his tailored trousers and dress shirts into his own plastic bags. He moved with a slow, defeated shuffle. The man who once terrorized local politicians and bullied real estate developers was reduced to a tenant facing a brutal, unyielding eviction. The clock ticked down. The moving crew finished loading the corporate assets and drove their large truck down the driveway, leaving the estate eerily quiet. At the exact end of the allotted hour, Richard and Cynthia emerged into the grand foyer. They dragged 4 bulging black trash bags across the polished marble floor. The plastic dragged against the stone, creating a harsh scratching sound that echoed off the high ceilings. They looked exhausted, diminished, and entirely broken. They did not have a luxury SUV waiting for them. Marcus had seized their vehicles during the initial asset freeze. They were forced to rely on a cheap rented sedan parked at the edge of the circular driveway. Richard pushed the heavy oak front doors open. The crisp evening air rushed inside. He lugged his bags down the wide stone steps, his shoulders hunched under the weight. Cynthia followed close behind him, wiping her tear-stained face, trying to hide her humiliation from the remaining security guards posted near the gate. They reached the rented vehicle. Richard popped the trunk. The space was small, forcing him to cram the plastic bags inside, pushing and shoving the material until the trunk lid finally latched shut with a dull metallic thud. Cynthia climbed into the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, refusing to look back at the mansion she lost. Richard slid behind the steering wheel. The engine of the older sedan turned over with a rough, struggling sputter before finally catching. He shifted the car into gear. Olivia and I stepped out onto the grand stone portico. We stood side by side on the top step, watching the vehicle slowly navigate the long, sweeping driveway. The car reached the edge of the property. The tall wrought iron gates swung open automatically, allowing the vehicle to pass through. The sedan turned onto the main road, its taillights fading into the growing dusk. The heavy iron gates swung shut, locking together with a loud, definitive clang. The estate was silent. The threat was gone. The toxic presence that haunted my entire existence was formally, permanently evicted. I turned my head and looked at Olivia. She stood tall in her razor-sharp midnight blue suit. The setting sun cast a warm golden light across her face, highlighting the fierce intelligence in her eyes. 24 years ago, she was a discarded secret of vulnerability meant to anchor me in poverty. Today, she was a formidable corporate attorney, a tactical genius who orchestrated the downfall of a corrupt dynasty using their own weapons against them. She caught my gaze and offered a bright, genuine smile. It was a smile unburdened by secrets or forged debts. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she had accomplished. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with undeniable triumph. I reached out and wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. We did not share biological DNA, but the bond we forged in the cramped guest house was stronger than any genetic tie. We survived the isolation, we endured the poverty, and we utilized our intellect to tear down the walls they built around us. We did not need an elite pedigree or a flawless family tree. We constructed our own empire using resilient strategy and unyielding truth. The fraudulent student loans were erased. The identity theft was exposed. The sprawling mansion behind us now served as the ultimate trophy of our survival. I looked out over the manicured lawns, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The heavy, suffocating burden of the past 24 years lifted entirely from my shoulders. The air tasted clean. The future stretched out before us, an open, unwritten canvas belonging exclusively to us. If you find yourself trapped in a system designed to exploit your loyalty, remember that you possess the power to rewrite the rules. Toxic individuals rely on your silence to maintain their illusion of control. When you gather your evidence, sharpen your mind, and refuse to absorb their guilt, their entire foundation crumbles. You do not owe your future to the people who try to steal your present. Stand your ground, build your strategy, and watch the perpetrators carry their own wreckage out the door. The victory belongs to those who refuse to remain in the shadows. I stand in the center of the grand foyer, the marble floor cool beneath my boots. The silence in the mansion feels different today. It is not the oppressive, fearful quiet of a hidden guest house. It is the steady, unbothered silence of a conquered fortress. Looking back at the 24 years it took to walk from the backyard into the master suite, I realize survival requires more than just endurance. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how you perceive reality. I paid for these realizations with my youth, but I am passing them on to you right now. First, biology is merely a genetic coincidence, not a binding contract. Society conditions us to tolerate abuse disguised as familial duty. Richard and Cynthia weaponized their parental titles to mask their tyranny, assuming the label granted them permanent immunity. It does not. Family is measured by the individuals who stand beside you in the trenches, not the ones who lock you in the dark. Olivia and I share no direct maternal bloodline, yet we forged an unbreakable bond out of shared survival. You owe zero loyalty to the architects of your suffering. Second, emotions hold no currency in the arena of justice. When you deal with predators, crying only fuels their ego. Pleading only validates their power. If you want to dismantle corrupt empires, you must trade your tears for empirical data. We did not defeat the Myers Syndicate by arguing about fairness or demanding apologies they were incapable of giving. We crushed them using certified bank ledgers, forensic audio tracks, and rigid corporate statutes. Keep your receipts. Document every transgression. Hard evidence is the only language abusers truly understand and fear. Third, a delayed existence is never a destroyed existence. They handed me a screaming infant at 14, expecting my ambition to wither. They stole my credit score, assuming it would chain me to poverty forever. But the very struggles they engineered to break me served as the training ground for my tactical mind. Every hurdle forced me to become sharper and infinitely more resilient. You can always reclaim the pen and write a new ending. The timeline belongs exclusively to you. The sun dips below the horizon, casting the estate in a cool twilight. Olivia joins me by the tall, arched window, handing me a cup of black coffee. We watch the heavy iron gates secure the perimeter. The debt is paid, the predators are exiled, and the empire is finally ours. Thank you for walking through this journey with me today. If my fight reminded you of your own inherent strength, leave a comment below sharing your personal victories against toxic people. Hit the like button, subscribe to Olivia Stories, revenge for more tales of ultimate payback, and never let anyone dictate your worth. I will see you in the next video.